Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today I'm at the wheel of one of the all-time greats in terms of small, fun, affordable sports cars. Yes, I'm driving a Ford Puma and I'm loving every minute of it. And if you enjoy this kind of car, please do hit that subscribe button and see more interesting reviews in the future. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today we're meeting another of my childhood heroes. Shut it. Yes, today we're looking at one of my all-time favourite cars, the Ford Puma. A beautiful, tiny little nugget of joy, based on a Mark IV Fiesta, but so much more and so much prettier. Let's take a look around. The car was announced in 1996 and it was launched in 1997, and it only ran for 5 short years until 2002. But the design, the style, was very much a product of its time, which is so 1990s. That era of soft curves, blended shapes, it's very, very present in here. In fact, it uses what Ford called new edge design. It was the brainchild of Jack Telnack, who had been their VP of design since 1980 and actually left in 1997 as the car hit the market. But what that means is lots of gentle curves, oval shapes and intersecting slashes and creases throughout the car. And the point of these slashes and creases is not only aesthetic, because it creates what they call surface tension around the car. Additionally to that, it helps speed things up on the production line because it's very easy to line up sharp edges and creases and build the car faster. This is all ultimately replaced by what Ford call kinetic design, which was the next design phase along after Jack Telnack had left. Now, although this is based on the Mark IV Fiesta platform, really it shares nothing at all on the outside with that car. The exterior is this beautiful little curvy coupe, and although it is a lot of curves and ovals and shapes, it's not like a Rover 75 where everything is egg-shaped. It's all elongated and pointed and quite dramatic and stylish. Even the rear lights are these individual, almost projector-like shapes for the individual lamps, and around the front it is 3 separate projector lamps as well. But to make building the car easy and keep production costs down, the actual pressings themselves are all quite simple. There's no extra spoiler on the back of it, it's just one simple pressing. And there's no metal surround around the tailgate glass. The glass is the tailgate. So no extra side pressings, no extra trim. They've done really well at making lots of dramatic shapes with a minimal number of parts. Well done, Ford. Now, under the bonnet, there was a choice of a couple of different engines, but there's only really one that's worth having. And that's this one, the 1.7. There was a 1.4 which made virtually no power at all. It was 91 horsepower, 125 newton meters of torque, 0 to 60 in 10.8 seconds, which is hardly a sports car, and a top speed of 112. Then towards the end of the run, they offered us a 1.6 litre, which is a little bit more oomph, but not a great deal. That was 104 horsepower and 125 newton meters of torque. It shaved the 0 to 60 down to 10.1 and meant you had a top speed of 118. Then we get the 1.7. This is the engine that everyone knows and everyone remembers, the Yamaha engine, people call it, because it was developed in conjunction with Yamaha. In fact, as far as I can tell, the block was cast by Ford in Seville, then shipped over to Yamaha in Japan, who Nikasil coated the cylinder liners and assembled the rest of the engine where they had developed it, and then that was shipped over to Cologne, where it was met with the rest of the car, because all of these cars were built in Cologne, Germany. That was the only place that assembled them. Now, this engine, the VCT, or variable cam timing, makes a significant jump more in power. It is 125 horsepower and 157 newton meters of torque, and that means we're actually into sports car territory at last, with a 0 to 60 of 9.2 and a top speed of 126. Now, of course, there was one more above this in the racing Puma, which is the big, full-blooded, full-fat, exciting, wide-body thing, but we're not driving one of those today. That's a different animal entirely. But that one, with the same 1.7, tuned a little bit differently, made a bit more power at 155 horsepower and a 30 more HP and a bit more newton meters of torque, and that meant the 0 to 60 dropped down to about 7 seconds, but the top speed stayed the same. Now, climbing into the boot is actually quite easy, because there's an ordinary button with a keyhole in it, so you can lock it and unlock it and stuff. Oh, it's still clicking, hasn't noticed the boot's open yet. But the actual aperture to get in here is really small, because we're in coupe sports car territory. It's not an estate car load lugger, although there is a big hole back here. A lot of space, actually. It looks a lot deeper than a Mark IV Fiesta's boot, for example. Actually getting big things in here is not that easy. However, this parcel shelf lifts out and these seats do roll forward, so if you've got anything long and narrow, you could welly it in there. There's nothing under the floor, because the spare wheel is actually hanging underneath the boot, so you need to grovel in the dirt if you get a flat tyre at night. But there you go, one okay sized boot. And one quite cool thing for a late 90s car, we actually have a proper handle up inside the tailgate, which is nice, and these little teeth, so you can eat stuff with the car. Yum, 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 yum. Right, so let's climb aboard and have a look in the interior. First of all, look at the weirdness of the shape of this door handle. It's very weirdly shaped. And of course these strange Ford locks from back in the day, which were quite a weird little idea, but they seem to like them for a long time. Climbing aboard, it's a big door opening to clamber through, and you have this rather interesting fabric. It's like peacock feathers that have been turned black and white and put on a blue background. And it's absolutely everywhere. Over here on the door cards, we've got beautiful sculpts in. Look at the way that sculpts in, scoops out, swirls down there into a Rover 75 inspiring oval-shaped, egg-shaped door handle, weirdly shaped speaker grille, all encompassed in another weirdly ovoid, random 90s curvy shape. Because, as I say, the 90s was the era of random weird curves, which has then continued into this little surround here in light metal-y coloured plastic with the window switches and the mirror switch, again all curvy and weird, apart from this bit, which is of course much older because it goes back to, let's say the Mark 1 or 2 Mondeo, Mark 6 Escort, who knows, it's an old bit of Ford stuff. And underneath that we've got a great big curvy swoopy door pocket. Now climbing in, let's have a look inside the car. Now, first of all, let's start with these rather nice white illuminated glowy dials. Now, I'm not sure you can see this in daylight because it's daylight, but these are entirely lit, bathed, if you like, in a green glow. It's like we've got Grotbags the Witch. So I'm flicking this on and off so you can tell. Grotbags the Witch is behind there with a torch on her face, giving us a green glow of glory across these white racing inspired orange needle dials. I'm going to turn that off because it's really grinding my gears. Now let's have a look up here. We've got a big curvaceous T-shelf, which is not great for standing anything on up here. Now pulling back from the dials, where we've got our rev counter up to 7,000, no actual red line on this car, so in theory, according to that dial, you can red line this car as high as you want, no bother at all. Top speed of 140 apparently, and then just the fuel and temperature gauges down on the right hand side, and a few random other warning lights. Pull back, and we have got a big swooping curve. This whole new edge design extends to the interior of the car, where everything is just sweeping, curving, intersecting lines and shapes. One panel swoops into the next one, and then another one swoops back into it. So we have this almost Art Deco, almost aerodynamic wing shape covering the top section in this silvery plastic stuff, where here we've got our air vents and multiple big chunky buttons, very American car market inspired by big chunky buttons. Then down into a Ford 6000 CD RDS Ian CD changer, compatible with phone, as in check out the old phone icon there from operator, please connect me to my Ford Puma. And this of course uses key code security, because this is back from the days when car radios were being stolen at a rate of 900 an hour in any town at all, not nationally, just per town. This continues in more curvy silver plastic down into the controls for the heating and ventilation. Air conditioning is fitted in this car. Late 90s, so air conditioning was coming fairly standard to European cars. If you're watching in America, that wasn't necessarily an ordinary thing still at this point in cars. So yeah, underneath that we have our sweetie wrapper tray, and obviously the lighter is up there. Below that we've got the word Puma. This is one of the few places in the car the word Puma actually appears. It's not like it's on the boot or on the wings or anything, it's just almost very discreet really. So the Puma is very stylized with the shape of a puma just in this little accent on top, just a curving impression of a big cat. Tiny alcove down there, which is just about big enough for 2 Mars bars if you put them end on into this aperture. Then moving back to one of the big selling points of the car, well, that's overstating it somewhat, but one of the big things that you do get in and go, ooh, that's nice, nice little USP of a metal globular gear shifter, 5-speed gearbox, manual of course. You don't want a fun exciting sports car with an automatic, this is a proper sports car. And then that's very much it for the front of the car. Just to mention that these air vents over here on the right and the left are also just randomly mad and curvy. And look how this dashboard binnacle comes so far forward, but then just vanishes back there to the air vent. There's almost nothing down there at all, apart from a little tiny cubby hole thing where you can lose keys and stuff. Now, climbing into the back, typical Ford ease of use. Climb in, it's a bit of a tight squeeze to get a full-size person through there. And it's even more of a tight squeeze, oh my word. I'm now wearing the chair. This is not, I'm going to call ideal. I might even go as far as to call it a bit painful. So I'll move that forward. So this is a rear seat really intended for children and occasional use. You do have an armrest, a speaker, more of this rather interesting material, and a cup holder on both sides. So that's quite useful. With more cup holders in the back than the front, which is something we seem to have found a few times recently. And in the back here though, you do notice how steeply the rear of the roof arcs down. In fact, arcs down quite hard and then goes flat across as it reaches the back window. And from this angle, it's quite a tight view out the back of the car. But I do rather like this double hump of the back of the seats. There's no actual seat headrests, but you do get a bit of interesting shape there. You could always use the ceiling itself, the headlining, as a headrest, because let's face it, your head is basically touching it anyway. Oh look, there's coat hooks for short items of clothing. Oh yeah. VCT engine revs like crazy, it's brilliant fun. Now inside, you are kind of aware of the 90s-ness of the design, but really that just adds to the charm. And you might think Ford are not very well built at all. This car's done 95,000 miles and is 21 years old. And it's even on its original exhaust still, so they can be made to last if you're looking after them. Now, first thing you notice is how light the accelerator is. You have to almost learn to hold back your foot from pushing too hard before it starts revving up like a crazy amount. The clutch is quite light as well. In fact, everything is very typically Ford light. If you've not driven a small Ford for a while, you do kind of forget how bumpy that road is, and also how light everything is. And the other thing is this gear shift. So tight, so close ratios, so close fitting in between the gear ratios. There's almost no space between one ratio point in the H pattern and the next. You can flip it through so easily. Now, the chassis on this car was designed or developed under a guy called Richard Parry Jones. He was in charge of making cars feel incredible at Ford. I think that might even been his job title, Incredibleness Feel Maker. He's been described as a chassis dynamics guru by Autocar magazine, no less. And he developed a thing he called the 50-meter test. In his opinion, an engineer should be able to work out how good or bad a car was in just 50 meters driving at low speed and learn more in that short distance than doing several laps at high speed around a track. He was that in touch and that focused and connected with the cars he was developing. And for that reason, this car is one of the greatest driving Fords you'll ever come across. So we have got fantastic, nimble chassis, tight steering, almost no turns, lock to lock. This great gearbox which just snicks from ratio to ratio, so you are absolutely a part of the car and it almost comes alive in your hands. It's just phenomenal. I've driven a few Pumas, 1.4s and 1.7s, and the 1.7s especially are just the best. The owner has said that a couple of times he's been slightly mocked at being a hairdresser car, that kind of thing. That's so wrong. Like MX-5s, if you like driving, you don't care what the car looks like. You just want to drive a car that rewards you for the drive, and this really is one of them. In terms of stopping power, it's got discs at the front, drums at the back, and being such a light little thing, that's more than adequate. Now, when Ford released this thing, they really did go all out. The press pack I've just seen for this car was a thing of wonder. A full-on A4 binder full of slides, a CD-ROM, even a 3.5-inch floppy disk of information. And this little variable cam timing 1.7, it wants to rev, it wants to fly. It really does let you let loose. This is such a nimble, grippy little car. Oh, it's brilliant. And you might remember the advert from this car from back in, what, 1997 or so, when they used some pretty advanced, for the time, CGI, where they incorporated bits of Bullet with a Puma driving around San Francisco with, of course, Steve McQueen at the wheel. But if you're watching this, say in America, you might be wondering why you've never seen one of these when they're advertising it with an advert filmed on the West Coast. Well, the fact is, it was only ever sold in Europe. It was built in Germany only, sold in Europe only. So the rest of the world, sorry, you never got to experience this absolutely fantastic little pocket rocket sports car. This is, of course, from the days of the hot hatch phenomena, and when coupes and things were being built by car manufacturers. It wasn't just big SUVs and boring bulky stuff. They actually went out and built some quite fun and interesting cars. And in total, they actually made 133,000 of these cars, which is a fair old whack of them. The thing is though, you might be wondering why you pretty much never see them anymore. And the answer is, unfortunately, rust. After the X-Plate cars in 2000, they started winding down production of the Mark IV Fiesta that these were based on. And so in order to keep production going, they started using Russian steel instead of German steel, which is apparently a fair bit thinner and not as good. And so although the early ones rusted, the later ones, wow, they really rusted. So if you go and look at a Puma where you can see rust on the rear arches, walk away, because that is the tip of the iceberg. That bit of rust there, that's the last bit you can see after the entire floor pan has gone, basically. So unfortunately, rust has killed these cars, which is a shame. But that does mean if you've got a good one, or you find a good one, grab it or hang on to it, because as they get rarer, they will become more and more valuable. These are a guaranteed future classic. Everyone who's ever driven one will tell you how good they are. Everyone who's looked at one will tell you how good they look. There's a lot of love for the Puma. Unfortunately, there just aren't very many Pumas anymore. I think there's maybe 1,000 or so not on sawn at the moment in the UK. Of course, those figures are always very, very shaky, but yeah, not big numbers by any means, which is a pity for such a good, fun, enjoyable car. Well, thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this run out in this enormously fun, one of my all-time favourite small sports cars. I love 90s cars, as you know, and this is one of the greatest cars of the 90s. If you've enjoyed this, please, as always, hit like and subscribe, and join me again next time, or driving something completely different.